go back to November 9th, 2017. Babylon Bee, a satire site, by the way. I'll remind the people at Daily Beast and BuzzFeed who tried to get me thrown off of social media because I talked about a Babylon Bee satire site. Hillary Clinton, and all the talk about Elizabeth Warren and her DNA. Hillary Clinton came out and said, and see, they got that wrong, and I'm not 100% reptilian DNA. Just to let you know, only half reptilian DNA. So I was laughing about that. I said, look at this. He's saying that Hillary Clinton is okay. Yeah, we get that idea. Snopes is constantly fact-checking Babylon Bee. And then if you talk about that, you get fact-checked by the wonderful journalists, quote-unquote, at CNN, Daily Beast, BuzzFeed, places like that. But here's the headline that the satire site, Babylon Bee, had back in 2017. CDC says people with dirt on the Clintons have an 843% greater risk of suicide. This has something that we have. It's just a pattern of behavior that we've seen. You know, when you have somebody die and you have a detective, like Detective Columbo. Oh, there's one more thing. Where were you on the night of this? And do you have any possible benefits from the death of this person? Who has motive to do this? Who has opportunity? Who benefits? We look at this type of thing. But no. We're supposed to just shut up and listen to the Kendallanians who work for the CIA and say, well, if you question the government's story, then you're a conspiracy theorist. It's always either a suicide or a lone gunman. And if you say anything other than that, you're a conspiracy theorist, and you're therefore stupid, right? You're a crazy, wild-eyed guy. But, blaming the Russians, that's not a problem. Again, everybody was saying, it wasn't but a couple of weeks ago that we had the attempted suicide. Everybody from Ann Coulter to everybody else was saying, get him out of there. He's going to get killed and so forth. And then it happens, and everybody's saying, all right, this is suspicious. Can we have an investigation? Of course you can't have an investigation. You're going to listen to the official story of the government. And here's how this is kind of broken down. Organic Prepper did a poll, and they asked people, what do you think happened to Jeffrey Epstein? Well, the lowest response was he committed suicide. Only 5% of the people believe that. 5% of the people don't have an opinion, or they think it's something other than these other choices. But here are the three top choices that got most of the votes. 59% said he was murdered. 14% said his death was faked so that he could go into witness protection. And 17% said his death was faked so he could escape. Interesting. So you put those two together, and you get 31%. About a third of the people think his death was faked. And that's kind of halfway split between people who think he went into witness protection and another half who think that he got out. The reporter in Florida who was responsible for kind of helping to get this reopened the second time, because remember, the first time he came up, he got a sweetheart deal from the prosecutor, from Ken Starr, his defending lawyer, and so forth. He pled guilty to a couple of charges. He was put on a list of sex offenders, and he was supposed to be monitored, and they never monitored him. But they cleared him of the trafficking charges that could have put him in life prison. And these new charges that started to be investigated in July, again, brought up human trafficking, enslavement for the purposes of sex, and also child trafficking, brought that up again. Now, the reporter who brought that to light, people asked, where is this Maxwell woman? We haven't heard anything from her. And she was kind of his partner in crime. She was procuring all this stuff. And she said, well, she's done she's got a lot of friends who are oceanographers. I think she's in a submarine. Somewhere. She's actually said that. I don't know. This is the woman who knows them better than I do. But when we look at why people would think that his death was faked, take a look at this tweet that was put out by somebody. I think it's Ryu Zoku is what he goes by, the Twitter handle. I don't know if who this is, but he put up a picture. Pull this picture up, guys. A picture of Jeffrey Epstein. He took it and turned it sideways because they made sure that they gave everybody a good look at the corpse, right? And so there you see the corpse of Jeffrey Epstein, and you see Jeffrey Epstein in profile, both of these in profile. Now, the first thing I noticed was a significant difference in the nose. But this person who tweeted out this side-by-side comparison of the alleged corpse and Jeffrey Epstein's picture turned sideways. Pointed out the ear. And there's even a greater difference in the ear. Now, that nose could have been, damaged between the times they had that picture taken and the other time. The nose is definitely not as pointed on the corpse as it is on the earlier living picture of Jeffrey Epstein turned in profile. But there's a big difference in the ear. So unless this guy was a professional boxer at some point in time, and he's now got cauliflower ears, as well as a flattened nose, I'm very suspicious. I'm kind of in that 1/3 of the people who say, I'm not really so sure that's even Jeffrey Epstein anymore, especially when you look at the information about the prison. And we're out of time now for this segment. So I'll get to that when we come back. I promise. I've been talking about the prison cell. I'll get back to the prison cell. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's talk about the details. As they say, we now have the autopsy. We don't have any video. They don't have any video in the cell. And they do have supposedly they have video of the doors so they could see people coming and going. They took out his cellmate a couple of hours before they came back and looked at Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, if he had been on suicide watch, they would have had somebody there every 30 minutes or so. But they had taken him off of suicide watch, reportedly at the request of his lawyers. His lawyers who now say they need to have lawyers. This is how you know that you're getting close to the elite. The people who are so dirty, so corrupt, so wicked and vile that their lawyers need lawyers. You better call Saul. Yeah, Saul Goodman. Yeah, Saul Goodman. Yeah, it's all good, man. So you have insiders who spoke to the Daily Mail and said that Epstein seemed to be in good spirits prior to that. There was no indication that he might try to take his own life. From what I saw, he was finally starting to adjust to prison life. I think he was comforted by the rigidity of his new life until they found him with rigor mortis in his cell. But, of course, we've seen this story, as I pointed out yesterday, many times. You had the D.C. madam talking to Alex Jones just before she was suicided, saying, no, I'm not going to take – he actually said, this is very dangerous what you're doing, exposing – the dark, secret sex life of very powerful people. Aren't you afraid that you might be suicided? You might be killed? They might say, I'm going to fight this, she said. I'm not thinking of suicide at all. I'm going to take this all the way through. Same thing with Gary Webb. He just restarted his life after character assassination, after he had revealed how our own government had created the crack cocaine epidemic so they could fund a secret war of regime change in Central America. And then he was suicided as well. We've seen this over and over again. And now there are indications from people inside who were watching Jeffrey Epstein. And they also said, these same people had said that he had told guards that somebody had tried to kill him. And then he hung himself. And so he was there, according to the story, for a couple of hours. They had one of the two guards who were supposed to come around and make their rounds. One of them was a ringer that they brought in. This guy was not even, he's a trainee or whatever. He's a new employee. That was very convenient. Very convenient. I don't know. When you look at a situation like this, as I said yesterday, all these people who are begging the government, please take away my freedoms and keep me safe. I've said this many times. The safest place you can find is a prison cell, except you're not very safe there. Just ask Whitey Bulger or Jeffrey Epstein what can happen to you there. And again, I have my doubts as to whether or not that was even Epstein's body now. I mean, anything is possible with these people. Take a look at what the prison cell was like. Marty Gottesfeld, and I've talked to his wife many times. We played reports from Marty as well. He's now in prison, in high security prisons. This is absolutely amazing to me to see people like Marty Gottesfeld and people like Julian Assange, people who are whistleblowers, who defend the little man. They are the ones who do the hardest time. And they've got Marty who's being transferred from one high security prison to another. He is now in a prison where they keep terrorists to try to minimize their communication to the outside. But he was, at one point in time, He was in this prison that they had Jeffrey Epstein in. He had blown the whistle on a medical kidnapping by a hospital that was associated with Harvard. They alleged and convicted him of hacking in during a fundraising event. And so now he is in jail for a very, very long time, doing very, very hard time, keeping him incommunicado. But he did get out information about that prison cell. We'll have that for you when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's talk about the prison that Jeffrey Epstein was in. And you've probably seen the article that came out a couple of days ago, came out over the weekend, as Jeffrey Epstein was alleged to have committed suicide. The New York Post spoke to an ex-convict on condition of anonymity. This ex-con had spent several months in this particular prison, and he said, "There is no way that a man could have killed himself. I've done too much time in those units. It's impossible. Between the floor and the ceiling, it's like 8 or 9 feet. There's no way for you to connect to anything. You have sheets, but they're paper level. They're not strong enough. He was 200 pounds. It would never happen. And when you're on suicide watch, they put you in a white smock, a straight jacket. They know a person can't be injurious to themselves. Of course, he was now off of suicide watch because his lawyers asked for that. But then he went on to say, could he have done it from the bed, which is what they're now telling us? No, sir. There is a steel frame, he said, but you can't move it. There is no light fixture. There's no bars. They don't give you enough in there that could successfully create an instrument of death. If you want to write a letter, they give you rubber pens. And maybe once a week, they give you a piece of paper. There's nothing hard or made out of metal. There's up to 80 people there. You could have put 2 in a cell. It's 1 or 2, but I'd never believe this guy had a cellmate. He was too blown up. Well, evidently he did have a cellmate, but not during the time at which he was found dead, allegedly. Now, Marty Gottesfeld, who is currently serving a 10-year sentence because he tried to draw attention to the medical kidnapping of Justina Peltier by Boston Children's Hospital, a hospital that was connected to the politically powerful Harvard network there in that area. He hacked in. He was convicted of hacking in to their computers during a fundraiser to draw attention to what was being done to her. She was taken to that hospital. She had been diagnosed at Tufts University with a physical condition. She had a bout of, I think it was a flu or something. They took her to Boston Children's Hospital momentarily. They had somebody who was working on a doctoral thesis about some kind of a psychological illness. It's kind of a Munchausen's by proxy type of thing, where it's psychosomatic illness. And this woman diagnosed Justina as being somebody who happened to suffer from what she was writing her thesis on at the time. And they essentially kidnapped her. And then they took her off her medication. And then her condition started deteriorating severely. Her parents could not get her out of the hospital. They took her away from the parents. And so Marty was very concerned about it. They convicted him of hacking that computer. And for that, we didn't have anything where any patients were endangered. It was simply drawing attention during a fundraiser. They gave him 10 years, a federal charge. And so he's been put in very, very high security prisons, amazingly. Yeah, he's not doing time at a federal country club, at a low security prison. They've got him right there in the prison where they had El Chapo, that same prison where they put Jeffrey Epstein. And he wrote a story about it in February this year that was published by The Intercept. And in that, Marty Gottesfeld said, I'm an imprisoned human rights activist, a political journalist, focusing on providing institutionalized children and protecting institutionalized children from common tortures in America like these. And he says, because of his treatment that he has suffered, he is currently suing the Bureau of Prisons and this particular facility there in New York, the MCC, for both state and federal civil rights violations related to the conditions where El Chapo is held. And he says, I'm exploring class action certification. He said, there's a lot of mystery surrounding the 10 South unit at MCC, where El Chapo is being housed, where Jeffrey Epstein allegedly died. He said the inmates aren't supposed to come into any visual or other contact with other inmates. Even magazines they receive in the mail must be pre-screened by the FBI for the supposed reason of intercepting hidden messages. Outbound communications are similarly restricted and monitored in real time. He said once El Chapo arrived at MCC New York, the staff appeared to be doing everything they could to get him to roll on the rest of the Sinaloa cartel, especially to try to get him to reveal where he's allegedly hiding $1 billion or so in assets in Mexico. The prison transferred Spanish-speaking staff to his unit in case he ever let something slip in his native language. This also seemed to be part of a good cop, bad cop routine. They vacated the cell next to his in an apparent effort to reduce his conversational options. They seemed to hope that he'd get lonely and decided to speak to prison staff. He said every inmate in 10 South is also on a status called a lieutenant hold, which requires using a lieutenant and 2 lower-ranking correctional officers to move them anywhere. El Chapo was a 3-lieutenant hold, meaning that 3 lieutenants were necessary to move him. Finding 3 lieutenants was no easy task, which meant that moving El Chapo was always an all-consuming process. He said the facility itself is trash. It has cockroach-infested meal trays and frigid, leaky cells. One inmate resorted to drinking from his toilet when the water was shut off. He said its sister facility across the river is now the subject of public attention, as detainees have been living there without heat. He said some inmates, however, saw at least one benefit from the alleged drug lord's arrival. Once he was in 10 South, the kitchen served his unit tacos for dinner. And then he drew with his rubber pencil what the room looks like with the bed there in the center. So when we look at this and you look at the massive amount of attention that is paid to these prisoners, these are people that the government puts there, they're very interested in. People like El Chapo, people like Jeffrey Epstein, people like Marty Gottesfeld, who blew the whistle on the corruption of an elite hospital affiliated with Harvard University. That's the kind of thing that gets you a 10-year jail sentence, or gets you killed, or maybe gets you disappeared. We don't know. We've had multiple people say in the conversations that the prosecutor there who gave the sweetheart deal to Jeffrey Epstein when he was being vetted by Trump's people, he said, I was told to lay off. This guy was connected. And we have the same thing coming out now from a Florida state senator, Lauren Book. She asked the governor there, Ron DeSantis, to order a state investigation of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's decision to allow Epstein to participate in a work release program. She said she had a lot of threats put against her because she wanted to find out why he got such a sweetheart deal. These are people who are highly connected, high-profile individuals, and they want us to believe that they just didn't know what was going on there at the time. I look at this, I look at the fact that we have the government that demands to know everything about you and I in our lives. And they take these high-profile people like El Chapo, and they're keeping the cell next to them vacant. They put somebody in there to talk to him, try to get into his confidence and so forth. That's what they do to high-profile prisoners. You don't think, though, that they really paid much attention to Jeffrey Epstein? They just kind of let him do his own thing. Not really too interested in what's going on with Jeffrey. He'll be fine. We just found him unconscious on the floor with burn marks around his neck, and he said somebody tried to kill him. But, yeah, he's doing fine. We don't have to keep too close an eye on him. I just wonder, when we look at this, what they're going to do to you and I if we give up our freedoms. To the extent that you give up your liberty, always promising to keep you safe, to that extent, they make you a slave. They make you a prisoner. These same people, these friends in Silicon Valley of his, they have a panopticon system that they are now putting in place to roll out, to monitor your every move. 5G is not only going to be the most invasive control mechanism you have ever seen, far more powerful than the internet is. And we've got the Pentagon pushing that very hard. It was DARPA that pushed the internet on us. A psychologist at DARPA, J.C.R. Licklider. All these different people putting in these control structures for us. And we'll talk about the health effects of that later on in the broadcast, hopefully. In the next segment, we're going to talk to Charles Ortel. As I tweeted out, these people who never investigated Jeffrey Epstein's life, are they going to investigate his death? I seriously doubt we'll get a real investigation of that. But Charles Ortel is somebody who has looked into the finances of the Clintons. And we're going to talk to him about what he knows about the Clinton Global Initiative. The founding father was Jeffrey Epstein. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Joining us now is Charles Ortel. Charles is the go-to guy if you want to know about the Clinton Foundation, about the Clinton Global Initiative. Charles has been investigating the finances of this in great detail for quite some time. You can find his information at charlesortel.com. And I wanted to get Charles on because now we've got another connection with Jeffrey Epstein to the Clinton Global Initiative. So joining us now is Charles Ortel. Thank you for joining us, Charles.
Thanks for having me on, David. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. You are the guy to talk to when it comes to the Clintons and their foundations. And back in 2007, Alan Dershowitz and his fellow defense attorneys said in defense of Jeffrey Epstein that Mr. Epstein, quote, was part of the original group that conceived the Clinton Global Initiative, which is described as a project bringing together a community of global leaders to devise and implement innovative solutions to some of the world's most pressing challenges. And so, that was put out there as part of his resume as to why he should get a light sentence because he's such an upstanding person giving money to the Clinton Global Initiative. What do you know about Jeffrey Epstein and him being part of the, founding donors of the Clinton's Global Initiative?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I hope it's one that investigators around the world are concentrating upon very closely. In the first instance, the Clinton Foundation, which was technically originally called the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation, is an entity that was incorporated on October 23rd, 1997, and had no authority ever to operate outside of the area that became the Clinton Presidential Park, around 27 acres or thereabouts, in a specific zone in Little Rock. That park was supposed to house the presidential records created or received during Bill's 2 terms as president and serve as a venue for scholars to come review those records. So in the beginning, there never was any authority to convene all these leaders behind closed doors in sessions that originated in New York City around the time of the UN General Assembly, and then pre-select bankers, accounting firms, wealthy investors to try to get together and concoct crooked deals outside the view of the mainstream media and the investigative authorities under the cover of this Clinton Global Initiative. So the Clinton Global Initiative as a legal entity was not actually incorporated until September 4th, 2009, yet it began to hold meetings in September of 2005. It held them in 6 and 7. Actually, where it got its official start, I think, is on November 15th, 2004, when somebody at the Clinton Foundation in New York arranged to secure the domain name ClintonGlobalInitiative.com. And I guess that's because it wasn't possible back then to get ClintonGlobalInitiative.con with an N. There is no such thing as a charitable organization that in secret, walls off from the public and allows cover for people to mill around in New York City and concoct these deals, and then never to account properly for any of this stuff. And for Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers to try to take credit for this in July, I think it was July 5th or 6th, 2007, is preposterous. I mean, Alan Dershowitz is a smart guy. Ken Starr, I think, was involved with this. Jay Lefcourt was involved with this letter.
Yeah,
and it wasn't just a letter. It wasn't just a letter. It was a letter, I believe, sent to a judge. So here's the lawyers for Epstein making preposterous claims that there was no Clinton Global Initiative. There was no legal charity called the Clinton Global Initiative. And it's certainly neither it nor the Clinton Foundation had any authority to do any of this stuff. And precisely at this time, the biggest piece of the Clinton Foundation, as you and I have talked about before, was the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, which also had no authority to exist. And whose operating authority in a key state of Massachusetts, where the main work was done, was involuntarily revoked with effect from December 31st, 2007. So I think what they were really doing here at a time when it was assumed that Hillary would be the president is putting Epstein on ice so that he would not become a problem during the election, the general election.
That's right, because that happened just as she was running for president back in 2008. Yeah, that was 2007. That's right.
Well, yeah, actually, she She announced for president on the 20th of January 2007, and she did so very aggressively, as basically going to the other candidates and saying, "I'm going to win and I'm going to be the president. You don't want to get in my way." That didn't work out so well for her.
Yeah, it didn't even work out well for her when she bought the DNC, heavily in debt, and she took all this money that people like Jeffrey Epstein and others had funneled to them, and she basically paid off the debts of the DNC when she ran against President Trump in 2016. That didn't work out well for her either. But as you pointed out, all of the structures, and this isn't even anything that is a questionable. What you have done, Charles, is you've looked at when these things were incorporated. You've looked at the requirements for what a real charity has to have, and you point out these are not charities. They're not legally incorporated. They've had their charters revoked and on and on. All of this is very, very clear. I'm hoping that because of the attention that Jeffrey Epstein's death has brought in, that people will not only look at the pedophile, the child trafficking stuff, but that they'll take a look at the finances here. There's so many different questions about how this guy had this meteoric rise through all this stuff and then was able to start channeling money to the Clintons from his Swiss bank accounts. This was I've got a report here from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. They found that $81 million had been routed from HSBC Swiss accounts to the Clinton Foundation, including money from Epstein that he sent. In 2006, he transferred $25,000 from one of his Swiss accounts to the Clintons. So hopefully people start taking a look at this dirty money that surrounds the Clintons.
Absolutely. And the story begins earlier than that. The story begins in around 1998 when it becomes clear that the Monica Lewinsky thing is going to explode and the Paula Jones and Kathleen Willey thing are going to explode. And it's around that time that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, however you pronounce her name, create a foundation called the COUQ Foundation and begin, in Maxwell's case, I believe she hosted a fundraiser for Jeffrey Epstein, for the Clinton Foundation in New York. And I don't know that there are the kind of records that should be in New York concerning who attended that fundraiser, how much money was raised, did these people register as fundraising agents. And then after Bill left the White House in disgrace, it was Epstein who provided his plane on numerous trips, not just to Africa, but to Asia and to Europe, to Norway. And there are records in all these countries of the arrivals and the clearances. But what there aren't are any audits for the Clinton Foundation for the period, real audits for the period through December 31st, 2004. And all of this should have been obvious to James Comey and Robert Mueller and Rod Rosenstein, who, in one way or another, were involved as the Clinton Foundation was under FBI investigation and DOJ investigation from February 2001 through sometime in 2005. Those all files.
We got to take a break. We'll be right back with Charles Ortel. And isn't it interesting, Charles, how we keep seeing these same people coming back, and now it's Comey's daughter, who's one of the prosecutors, quote unquote, of Jeffrey Epstein. It's just amazing how these people keep recycling. They keep recycling the same people over and over again. We'll be right back with Charles Ortel. We'll take a look at more of the Epstein-Clinton finances. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking to Charles Ortel. Charles has spent a great deal of time investigating and exposing the fraudulent legal, I guess you could call it the presumptions of the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Global Initiative, showing how they have violated international law, state law, multiple places, just by their founding documents, by the way they have not reported, they have not legally organized, and yet they have been accepting massive amounts of money. As I pointed out, a whistleblower working with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists reported that $81 million had been transferred from Swiss bank accounts managed by HSBC to the Clinton Foundation. That Epstein had transferred money from his multi-million-dollar Swiss bank accounts, also under HSBC. And as we were going to break, Charles, you pointed out that Comey and Mueller had connections with these people. And, of course, James Comey was he was on the board of directors at HSBC, a bank that has been busted not once but twice for money laundering to drug cartels and to terrorists. As a matter of fact, they gave the Sinaloa cartel their own personal checkout money laundering window. to put stuff through there. And I was just talking about how El Chapo was at the same prison. I mean, Charles, this is absolutely amazing. When we look at Ken Starr, when we look at the Barr family, his Bill Barr's father was there at the beginning of Jeffrey Epstein's career. William Barr was there at the end of his career. When we look at this, this is like some kind of a Dickens novel where the relationships between all of these elite characters is so tight, all the different corporations that are involved, so tight, very small circle of very powerful people who are running the world. And at the center of all this is this kind of sexual depravity that we see, but also the financial misappropriations that can easily be proven based on the research that you've done.
Yeah, it's really amazing. On the strange life and even stranger death of Jeffrey Epstein, I'm not buying any second of it.
No.
I mean, he graduated from high school at the age of 16 in 1969. I graduated at the age of 18 in 1974, and I went to a rival school to Dalton called Horace Mann. These are schools here in New York that are super expensive now and reasonably expensive back then, that parents who want their kids to go to a good college pay the extra money, rather than going to public school, and you go to this private school and you expect the teachers to be, have credentials. The idea that a guy, Jeffrey Epstein, who, flubbed out of one place as a freshman year, and then flubbed out the second time, he's never accounted. We don't know what he was doing from 1971 to 1974. He started at Dalton in September of 1974, but that was, I believe, after Barr's father was out. And we don't actually know what he was doing at Dalton specifically. Was he just a tutor? Was he a teacher? What did he tell Dalton about his background to get the job? What sort of vetting was done? Why did he leave? Did he leave under good circumstances? How did he go to Bear Stearns? I mean, there are just so many questions. He was involved with, fraudsters and Ponzi schemers. Stephen Hoffenberg, who did the Tower Financial fraud and is in prison. He worked closely with him. None of this really checks out. And the idea that during this time frame, he would amass all this money, paying taxes lawfully, is something that the IRS should be able to verify. So who was this guy?
I've seen a different timeline on that would put his hiring at the time that Bill Barr's dad was there. But nevertheless, as you point out, a very expensive, very elite school, the Dalton School, is where Gloria Vanderbilt decided that she would send little Anderson Cooper to go to school. Many people who went on to become famous as actors and actresses, people like Chevy Chase and so forth. This was a very elite school. The idea that you'd have a guy who had never gotten even a college degree, had dropped out of a couple of different schools, had disappeared, as you point out, for several years, and then he gets hired at, I think, the age of 20 with no college degree to teach at this elite place here. And then he goes on, Charles, to start managing the finances. About 10 years later, you find him, after he goes to Bear Stearns, you find him managing the finances for a multi-billionaire, Leslie Wexner, who owns Victoria's Secret. And Wexner loves him so much that he gives him a $77 million mansion. I mean, this is just amazing how this guy is a made man by these people.
Yeah, I mean, I call, to put it politely, and I happen to like bologna sandwiches, but I call bologna sandwich on all that.
Yeah,
I mean, Bear Stearns, after I got out of Harvard Business School in 1980, I went to work for a firm called Dillon Reed, which was far more established than Bear Stearns. And I can tell you that in 1981, when Epstein left Bear Stearns, I mean, things were very, very difficult. You well remember that Reagan had not yet been able to resuscitate the economy. So where did he get enough money to set up something and market to these billionaires, specifically Les Wexner? And why did a supposedly cautious Wexner entrust so much money and authority to a guy who has holes all over his resume? There have been reporting on why he left Bear Stearns, and there are allegations in the press that he told Bear Stearns he went to Stanford, which he never did. And, it's really time for the mainstream press. I mean, we're doing it, but it's time for the mainstream press to really go to the mat here and ask a lot of questions. I mean, I look at, sorry?
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you. When we look at this and we say, how could this happen with somebody? Well, we go back and we look at Alex Acosta. And when he was being vetted by the Trump people, somebody asked him about this sweetheart deal that he cut as prosecutor with Jeffrey Epstein. He said, well, I was told that he belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. And so then the question is, Is he running honey traps for the CIA? Or, as some people have suggested, maybe he was running honey traps for Mossad or some other intelligence organization, because he's got so many. We had a CIA agent who has come out, ex-CIA agent, who said, look, with all the people that he's cozying up to that are very powerful Americans, I would suspect that it was Mossad that was doing this. We don't know. But clearly he is so well connected in this inner circle of everybody there, and able to supply all these people with whatever depravities they're looking for, and probably to entrap them as well. It does look like he has something going there with the intelligence agencies. But the key thing is his connection to all of these different people that we keep resurfacing. Resurfacing, coming back, people like Comey, who, again, is tied with HSBC, the people running the Swiss bank accounts for him and others, with the Clinton associates. And his daughter now was one of the prosecutors, supposedly, that were coming after Jeffrey Epstein. What do you think about that?
Sorry, there's background noise here.
That's all right. I was just asking you about what do you think about James Comey's daughter being the prosecutor there in New York, coming after Epstein?
I think she should not be on this case. I mean, there's so many obvious conflicts here. And we get lectures from the mainstream press about how noble and high and mighty these organizations are. And it's not the actual conflict, but it's the appearance of a conflict that's a problem. I mean, come on. Comey led an investigation as U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York into the Clinton Foundation and failed to spot the obvious rampant fraud. At the time that he got in there, late in 2001, the Clinton Foundation had never had the required audit that's required under New York law, Arkansas, never got it. And he couldn't see that with access to, the FBI and all the interviews they did. What is in the FBI file about any interviews with Maxwell and with Epstein, who reportedly gave money in this time frame to this presidential foundation? What is in there? How much studying was done under Comey, under Mueller from September 4th, 2001? On the FBI file, vault file that you can get on the internet, there is a briefing memo, I believe in July of 2002, I don't have it in front of me, that specifically was a memo to Mueller, keeping him abreast of this investigation. There couldn't have been many more high-profile investigations going on at that time. Obviously, 9/11 and aftermath was important, but how many players contributed money via Epstein in fundraisers that were not arranged lawfully in New York and in California? And why did the FBI see any of this?
Absolutely. And of course, Mueller's got his own issues with his involvement with Whitey Bulger, the mysterious assassination of Whitey Bulger within the prison system. That would require a lot of people high up. A lot of things here that are circulating that are out there, and their only explanation is, it's just a conspiracy theory. Thank you so much, Charles Ortel, charlesortel.com. Welcome back. We're going to take a look at how the narrative and how our culture is being pushed by these people that form a very tight circle around Jeffrey Epstein and the Clintons and the technical elite, people like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and others. What do they have in store for us? Well, we can see what they are pushing on us and our children. I mean, just take a look at how radical Disney has become. They've essentially murdered. You want to talk about who killed Jeffrey Epstein? Who killed Star Wars? Well, it was Disney that killed Star Wars with their intersectional feminism. And they're killing the Marvel franchise with the same type of thing. They can't, their park attendance is way, way down because they've essentially killed off the franchises that they own by pushing this social agenda. But it is very, very important for them to do that. It is a key thing for them to do. And they're going to weaponize the information that is out there. I've got several stories talking about that, beginning with health information, quite frankly. One of the things that we do here is we try to give you unfiltered information. If you want a different independent opinion, whether you agree with us or not, we're going to tell you what we think. And we are free here at InfoWars. There is no control of what we have to say here. That's one of the reasons I love working here. Alex does not tell me what I have to say about anything. I'm going to be very critical about President Trump and his red flag gun laws coming up in the next hour. And Alex has been critical of that as well. But he doesn't tell me that what I have to say about something, what I have to talk about, what I can't talk about. We don't have that kind of editorial control here. And if you want free and independent news, the only way you're going to get that is if you support us. And one of the things that we tell you about, and always have, is we give you straight up information about health risks. I'm going to talk to you also about not only the threats to your freedom and your independence. I mean, we talk about Jeffrey Epstein being in this high security prison. And of course, they don't have any video of him. They know everything about you, though. They've got Alexa and they've got Amazon employees listening to everything that you're doing privately with you and your spouse. But of course, they can't know anything about what's going on with Jeffrey Epstein. It's kind of like whenever you've got some kind of a high profile police situation where it looks like somebody died under questionable circumstances. Oh, well, we didn't have the body cameras turned on. Well, they didn't have the cell cameras turned on there in the high security prison where they're monitoring everybody, where they don't move anybody without having 2 or 3 or 4 people going with them everywhere they go. And that kind of an environment that's just like, we didn't know. I mean, he's over there doing his own thing, and we weren't watching, and we don't have any cameras going on or anything. I mean, you believe that kind of stuff? No, I don't believe that either. Folks, if you want to keep us going here, we've passed our 1-year anniversary of the ban, where all these people, these technical elite, as well as these political elite, and folks, it is not something, this is one of the things that is one of the most irritating for me in this last year. To hear all of these people on the left applauding censorship, applauding a kind of totalitarian power given to big tech companies, these same people who rail about Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision that said corporations can buy ads to talk about issues. And so, no, you can't have corporations with the power of people. You can't have them influencing our elections. And yet these people are loving what the big corporations are doing right now, because right now the big corporations are aligned with them politically. They don't care about the principles. They're only concerned about the end. They don't care about the means that are being used. And so we have the people on the left who are embracing this public-private partnership to control our speech, to control our press, to control everything that you see and hear. And part of that was the ban that began with Alex Jones and InfoWars, because they believed that we were the most influential of all the people out there, that they needed to stop us because we were having a lot of influence. And they showed that they were able to do that. And nothing is being done about that up to this point. We've got a couple of solutions that are being thrown out there. We're going to take a look at whether or not those are a good or a bad thing as we come up. But just want to remind you of the sales that we have, because we try to make this a win-win situation for you and for us. So we produce the best quality products for your health, and we try to put them out there at a very competitive price. And now we have discounted them even further, 50 to 60% off the products at InfoWarsStore.com, plus free shipping, plus double Patriot points on everything that you buy at InfoWarsStore.com. We got things like storable food, storable for up to 25 years, all made in America, non-GMO, the best packaging you're going to find anywhere, resealable after you open it, up to 50% off. And we have Real Red Pill, 60% off. We have DNA Force Plus, 50% off, massive savings on that as well, because that's a very expensive product, but a very, very valuable product for your longevity. Brain Force Plus, I like to call that Brain Focus, because that's what I find it helps me to do. Brain Force Plus, now 50% off. Survival Shield X2 Nascent Iodine, 50% off. Ultra 12, our vitamin B12 formula, now 50% off. All these and many more. Ultimate Fish Oil, 50% off. Take a look at the specials we have at InfoWarsStore.com. We try to make this as much of a win for you as it is for us. If you support us, that's the only way that we survive, is with the products that we sell to help you support your health and your family's health at InfoWarsStore.com. Again, free shipping, double Patriot points, 50 to 60% off the InfoWars Life products. While we're talking about health, remember, it was just a week or so ago that I was talking about the PFAs that they're finding in water. This is a class of chemicals that come out of the non-stick Teflon type of products that are out there. And, of course, they've gotten into the groundwater supplies. One of the reasons why I said, look, one of the first products that Alex started selling here was water filters, gravity feed water filters, because there's so many different ways that your water can get contaminated. It can be contamination through the groundwater because of a chemical spill, like these PFAs. Or it could be something like deliberate, on the urban water supply where they deliberately dump rat poison, that kind of fluoride, because there's different types of fluoride, into your water. Or where it's neglect, like we saw in Flint, Michigan. And you don't really understand that until after it's happened. And so you've got Richard Blumenthal, senator out of Connecticut, calling the FDA and the EPA to task, saying, you're not doing anything about this. And, of course, they didn't do anything about what happened at Flint, Michigan. That was a failure under Democrats, from the federal to the state to the local level, Democrats, top to bottom, as well as the environmental agencies that failed to do anything about that. And so the FDA has failed in protecting you. The EPA has failed in protecting you. Can you even get any information? Well, Google is failing to let you find that information. The Intercept has an article out today. Industry cites a 3M experiment. These are the people behind the PFAs to claim that chemicals aren't so bad. The defenders of these chemicals, writes the Intercept, have seized upon an industry-funded study of cancer patients as evidence that the compounds that are used to make Teflon, that are used to make firefighting foam, and many other products aren't as dangerous as they seem. Listen to what they did. They funded a study with 49 terminal cancer patients. They gave them high doses of PFOA, and that is something that you find frequently in the water. And what they said was, of course, it did not appear to help them fight cancer. Instead, they posted it, however, as good news for their particular chemical that they use in Teflon. They said the patients, even though it didn't help them with their cancer, they had problems with fatigue, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. But that was a win, according to these people. They also said that seemed to decrease their cholesterol levels. However, there's been a lot of other research done by other people that was not on terminally ill cancer patients. So I guess that study did not last too long. It was only a 6-week trial period. That's exactly the opposite of what other people found. They found that, among other things, it would typically elevate cholesterol levels, and it would interfere with developmental, hormonal, reproductive, and immune functions. Do things like mess with your thyroid, give you thyroid disease, and do give you cancer. But, of course, they gave it to terminally ill cancer patients and said, oh, no, look, they still died, but they already had cancer, and we measured them having a decreased cholesterol level. Well, I don't think that I'm going to start licking Teflon pans now to get my cholesterol level down based on this study. And when we come back, I'm going to tell you how Google is burying information from alternative health sites to make sure that people don't get information about medical supplements and other things that might be dangerous. They don't want you to see that. Why is that? Why is it that you don't hear these kinds of reports that we talk about here at InfoWars? Why don't you hear that on cable news? Would it be because cable news's biggest sponsor are these Ask Your Doctor commercials, these very dangerous, very expensive drugs? We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Yesterday I talked about how Monsanto, but actually the parent company now that bought them out, Bayer, came after a Reuters journalist who, Carrie Gillum, who was reporting on glyphosate and the link to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a link that has been agreed upon by at least 3 juries now. There are thousands of people with lawsuits against Monsanto claiming that it greatly increases the risk of that particular type of cancer. This is not really anything new. This goes back, as I pointed out many times, to the 1980s. I had a dog that had contracted that specific type of cancer. And I thought it was odd. But this dog did not like to be in the backyard and would frequently hop the fence and would get onto the lawn occasionally of neighbors who were having their lawns treated with chemicals. Came down with this, and just as the dog was diagnosed with this, I heard a report on NPR talking about how agricultural workers who were using glyphosate were coming down with the same type of cancer, even though they used protective clothing. So I thought, well, that's interesting because that's probably what happened to my dog. That was 30 plus years ago. And so this isn't anything new. What is new is that you've now had 3 juries give massive awards. In one case, it was $86 million. The next case, $200 million. 200 260, something like that. And then a $2 billion case, which the judge then struck down to, I think, $86 million. People who were dying of cancer. And to fight this, Bayer and Monsanto were paying Google to promote search results that criticized the work of this journalist. And they were also lobbying Reuters, putting pressure on them to reassign her and to shut this down. And they also set up a fusion center. Monsanto, Bayer did a fusion center, just in case you don't understand that there is a really tight correlation between the police surveillance state and these corporations. I mean, it is a symbiotic relationship, and you can't tell where one ends and the other one begins. Fusion centers run by corporations, the same type of corporations that are working with the military-industrial complex, giving them the technology to spy on you, to profile you, to anticipate what you're going to do, using these fusion centers to look at a right-to-know nonprofit organization that was talking about these health issues. And now we learn, in an article by fee.org, Foundation for Economic Education, fee.org, Google is burying alternative health sites so that you can protect people from dangerous medical advice. They will decide what you are allowed to see and hear. And it's going to be things that are their particular slant on morality, as we've been talking about in this program, how these same tech executives who are partying hardy with people like Jeffrey Epstein, providing them with sex and drugs, these same people pushing their cultural agenda on you and your children, just like Hollywood is, just like the federal government is, through their educational institutions, through their media and their entertainment institutions, through the control of the internet. They will also decide whether or not you're going to hear anything about abortion, whether or not you're going to hear anything about particular drugs that are being sold by their big pharmaceutical partners, these same individuals. And fee.org starts out with an analogy of what is happening to Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, where, again, the firemen were the people who were setting fires, not putting out fires. They were setting fires. They were burning books. And it was a science fiction anticipatory explanation tale of our particular times. Because now Google has turned into Fahrenheit 451 itself. More on that when we come back. Stay with us. The real aim of censorship is to control the population. If you control the information, you control the people. And this is true on so many different levels. As fee.org is pointing out, the correlations between what Google is now involved in and Fahrenheit 451. They quote one of the characters in Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury's dystopian novel of the future, where censorship reigns supreme, where the firemen are there to burn books. They said, quote, the fireman Montague, you can't build a house if you don't have nails and wood. So if you don't want a house built, you hide the nails and the wood. And that's now what the world's biggest search engine has become. It's no longer a search engine to find things. It is now a search engine that hides things. It hides things. As they pointed out in the novel, if you don't want a man unhappy politically, don't give him two sides to a question to worry him. Give him one. Better yet, give him none. Let him forget that there's such a thing as war. If the government is inefficient, if it's top-heavy, if it's tax-mad, better it be all those than that people worry over it. So just hide the information from them. Everything is fine. You know, there's nothing to be concerned about. As we were told by Ken Delanian, all these conspiracy theory nuts are going to come out of the woodwork after the second attempt on Jeffrey Epstein's life apparently succeeded, or maybe it didn't. Maybe that guy they pulled out that has a different nose and ear, maybe that's not Jeffrey Epstein at all. Maybe it goes even deeper than that. But nothing to see here, right? We shouldn't worry about the Clintons' finances. We shouldn't worry about where this flunky who had a questionable start gets hired at this elite school, even though he couldn't and didn't have a degree, dropped out of two different schools. He has big gaps, as Charles Ortel was pointing out earlier. How's this guy with all these gaps in his resume, how's he become the sole money manager for a multi-billionaire? Yeah, how does that all happen? Oh, don't ask any questions. But in this context, what fee.org is talking about is how Google is hiding any information that questions the safety and the efficacy of certain drugs. You know, just like they do with vaccines, but it's also the other products of the big pharmaceutical companies. You don't want people to hear about the vaccines because, look, you don't even want them to know that there is a special master that handles vaccine injuries and deaths, because we're supposed to believe that nobody gets injured or killed from vaccines. They don't have any downside. And even if you know about that, and even if you go to this arbitration procedure, if you can find it, good luck. But if you can find it, and a lot of people have, they've given out billions of dollars, but it takes a very long time to get something from them, and you're not going to get the kind of compensation that you would in a jury trial, because the point of a jury trial, as we see with these glyphosate trials going on now, the point of those jury awards is to stop the manufacture and the profit from dangerous products. And of course, that's already been taken care of when the vaccine companies were given immunity from prosecution. And they did a similar thing for the telecommunications companies 10 years later, in 1996, with the Telecommunications Act. The federal government said, we're not going to let you have any objections to cell phone towers, and that's going to be so convenient for them when they get to 5G. And they're going to get away with that if we do not assert our 10th Amendment rights and powers. The states delegated some powers to the federal government, but not those powers. The states delegated certain power and authority to the federal government, but not power to tell us when life begins, not the power to define marriage, not the power to take away our Second Amendment rights or to give them to us. That is the power of the people and the power of the state governments, according to the 9th and 10th Amendment. And if we don't take those powers back, they're going to be able to use things like the Telecommunications Act, things like the Vaccine Immunity Act, and organizations like Google and these people that they've been partnering with to control our information. You know, if you don't know that these things are harmful, then they get away with this. And they have scattered money through cable news to make sure that nobody's going to question what they do. In this article from FEE, they talk about a guy, Vernon Smith. He is a Nobel laureate in economics, and he started taking statins. This is something that was prescribed for me after my heart attack. I had a doctor prescribe that for me. Unlike Vernon Smith, I already knew something about statins. What he did was he started taking it, and then he started noticing that it was having certain bad effects on him. He said, in the last week, I had a very clear now experience of temporary memory loss. I did a little searching, and I found this article that summarized and documented the evidence over many years. He said, such incidents have been widely reported. But the problem did not arise in any of the clinical trials, but neither were they designed to detect it. He said statin effectiveness in reducing heart and stroke events needs to be weighed against the important negatives, you know, things like losing his memory. He said, since I'm actively writing, this is a primal concern for me, and so I have stopped taking this drug. And as they point out on the Foundation for Economic Education, fee.org, they said, yeah, this is the trade-off that we should be able to make. If we had full access to information, pro and con, on these different drugs, then we should be able to look at this, and on an individual basis, we could look at it and say, well, you know, based on these other studies, I think that, you know, the efficacy is such and such, and the side effects are this, and maybe I don't want that particular side effect. Like he said, if it's going to affect my memory loss since I'm actively writing and that's my livelihood, I don't want to take that. I looked at it, and I looked at the literature in terms of cholesterol and how it is not really even a very good measure of some of these, according to some people. Again, you may differ. You should be able to look that information up. But if you've got people who want to sell you something, and believe me, the government has got a lot that they're trying to sell you, but so do these corporations. That's why the two of them work together. If you've got somebody who's got an agenda that they want to sell to you, or somebody who's got a very expensive product that they want to sell to you, they're going to skew that information. And now Google is a willing partner in that. They are hiding that information, according to this article from fee.org. They go through about the fact that Google is now already burning sites that question any medical orthodoxy. In the same way that they do if you question the government's line on environmentalism. And, you know, it was last weekend, while I was gone, last week, the UN started this agenda, and I saw it being pushed everywhere. At the top of all of the news sites I was looking at, all the establishment news sites, they were all pushing the fact that we've got to change the way that we grow food, and we got to stop raising meat and so forth and so on. Everybody was doing it in unison. Very interesting. And yet the contrary evidence of that seems to get shut down. Here's an example. When we look at the shootings that happened last week, the Dayton and El Paso shootings, Epic News pointed out that a study done by allsides.com saw that if you did searches about those particular shootings, you saw no right-leaning news sources in the top 3 story results by Google. Now, this is not something that people are paying to promote like they did. They paid to, Monsanto paid Google to promote articles that were critical of the criticism of glyphosate. So that was their counter-criticism of the glyphosate critics. They paid Google to promote that. But this is something that Google is doing just out of their own political bias. Google returned results favoring left-leaning CNN. Listen to how this was skewed. They said 70% of the sources, if you looked up information about guns, about shooting, about El Paso and Dayton, 70% were from sources on the left. And that was even though All Sides considers sources like NPR to be center, not left-wing. They consider Associated Press to be center, even though Associated Press has imposed their style rules on everybody, talking about how you're going to talk about abortion or immigration or whatever. Oh, no, they're the center. Even they said that it was skewed to the left. Yeah, let's talk about the deception. And again, this is All Sides did a study in the wake of the shootings in El Paso and Dayton. They looked at certain search words on Google. They typed in things like shooting, El Paso, Dayton, guns, multiple times over 3 days between August the 5th through the 7th in the aftermath of the shooting. And they found that in the top stories, they said that 70% of the results were from sources on the left, while about 18% of those were from sources that they considered to have a center bias. And those that they considered to be in the center were places like NPR, USA Today, and Associated Press. I don't consider those to be center. Do you consider NPR to be center? Seriously? But nevertheless, they found 4% came from sources that they said would be biased to the right. So the 96% were not. And it was very focused on 3 organizations. This is what Google is pushing people to. CNN. They said I found 1/4 of the results came from CNN. Second was the New York Times with 14%. Third came the Washington Post at 7%. So there you have CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, 46% of the news sources. And then 70% from other left-wing sources. Only 4% from conservative sources. That is the kind of steering that we're seeing Google doing to people. Now, Microsoft is also working on their own project in coordination with DARPA. Microsoft has NewsGuard and Election Guard, which is being funded by DARPA. DARPA gave them a $10 million grant to a corporation that is a fully owned subsidiary of Microsoft. And of course, their only job is to guard our elections, Election Guard. You don't think this is serious? You don't understand what the problem is. And the thing I look at when I look at the proposals, and again, we've got some comments, an op-ed piece from the Hill questioning whether or not the government ought to do anything to protect free speech from our corporate masters. And I would say you don't even understand the problem. If you think that the government isn't driving the corporations to do the censorship, you don't understand what the issue is. And if you don't understand how DARPA is funding the takeover of our elections through things like Election Guard and News Guard, and how Google is steering people to CNN, you don't understand what the problem is. And you don't understand how DARPA and other intelligence agencies were funding these tech startups 20 years ago. As the internet became practical, they made sure that it was going to be used to push their political bias. Again, going back to this fee article, when you look at what is happening with just medical sites, and I pick this because can't we all, we're going to people out there who are going to say, well, I don't like guns, and so I want them to censor guns. Or I don't like Trump, so I want them to push information that is opposing Trump or whatever, or vice versa. Can't we all agree that we want products that are safe and healthy, especially when it comes to medicine? Can't we all agree about that? So why are we not concerned about what Google is doing when it starts suppressing information and pushing other information to us for profit? The profit of big pharmaceutical companies. Can't both the left and right agree on that? And can't we then see that maybe we shouldn't have a corporation that is manipulating our information about politics because they don't like that? What we have now learned after the June 19th algorithm update at Google, what we've now learned is that Google is relying more on human quality raters. So they've been telling us, oh, no, this is an unbiased algorithm. No. This is their human bias that is being put in there. And so they have what they call YMYL pages, your money, your life pages. And they said the lowest ratings should go to a YMYL page with inaccurate, potentially dangerous medical advice. And of course, they will decide which medical advice is dangerous. They will decide which science is science. There will be no discussion. We will go with the conventional wisdom. We will have no skepticism allowed. We will have the elitist consensus be sold to us, and nothing else will be allowed. These are also the same people who are going to decide what political ideas are dangerous and which ones are going to be allowed as well. This is why when we look at Google, when we look at NewsGuard, when we look at Election Guard, this ought to be a 5-alarm fire because this is Fahrenheit 451. Again, going back to the novel, they quote the tactic that is explained by one of the firemen, the people assigned to burn books as part of their censorship, Captain Beatty, in Fahrenheit 451. He explains the strategy. He said, we want to give them a lot of information, just not important information. We want them to have all the words to a popular song. We want them to have the names of all the state capitals. We want them to know how much corn Iowa grew last year. But we don't want them questioning philosophy. We don't want them questioning what the government is doing. Does that sound like Google today? Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. He said, filled with facts, people will feel their thinking. They'll get a sense of motion without actually moving. Don't let the torrent of melancholy and drear philosophy drown our world. We depend on you. We're the happiness boys. I don't think you realize how important you are to our happy world as it now stands. And when I look at those quotes from Fahrenheit 451, I remember November 2017, the little publicized testimony of the Pentagon spokesman who testified to the, I forget whether it was a House or a Senate committee, that had just talked to all of these internet controllers. And he came out and he said, we're having these discussions and it's getting the population very upset. People are getting polarized and we're going to have a civil war if we don't stop this discussion of free speech out there. He said, we have to, and this is his phrase, we have to silence the cannons on social media. We got to take the big guns down. And that's what they did with Alex Jones. They had the banniversary last week. And then they started taking down alternative press that was talking about the surveillance state, the police state, and the abuses of that. Talking about our unending wars and regime change. And now they're taking down anybody who talks about alternative medicine or talks about the health effects of these particular issues. Don't talk about abortion. Reuters These people who have, Associated Press, not Reuters, but Associated Press, they don't want to use the terms pro-life or pro-abortion or whatever, pro-choice even. They want to say you're either pro-human rights or anti-human rights, reproductive freedom. That's the way they couch it. That's the way they control us. That's what this is. When we come back, we're going to talk about the hypocrisy of the left on speech, and we're going to talk about the red flags and how what is being proposed in these executive orders really is a red flag. It's not a red flag for safety. It is a red flag telling you that the government is coming after your God-given liberties. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's talk a little bit about red flag gun laws. We have Lindsey Graham saying that he's never seen Trump as determined as he is now on red flag laws and on background checks. Let's play that clip of Lindsey Graham, video clip number 1.
I think there's a determination by the president to act this time to create a grant program at the federal level to help local law enforcement to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. The proposal I've got with Senator Blumenthal would create a federal grant program requiring due process at the state level so that local police officers could hire mental health professionals to advise them on what cases they would take to a judge. And the only time you can have a protective order is a hearing with the judge with robust due process. But I've never seen the president this determined, quite frankly. I think he's determined to do two things: to make sure that people who are suffering mental health problems, who are dangerous and to themselves and others, that we act before they use the gun, and that we enhance background checks in a way that makes common sense. I think there's bipartisan support for this. My question is, will the Democrats be willing to work with the president, or will they keep moving the goalpost? I don't know.
Okay.
And again, notice that they are focusing on the tool. They're not focusing on the person necessarily. And we've already heard the president talk about take the guns, do the due process later. I'm not buying this commitment to due process. You got Lindsey Graham out there saying we're going to create a massive bureaucracy, which is what he's talking about when he says a grant program at the federal level. They're going to bribe and give the money to state and local governments to create a massive web of psychiatrists to entrap people. All you have to do to take a gun away from anybody is have anyone, anywhere, at any level, and any bureaucracy or any family member or any alienated spouse, anyone, neighbor, somebody doesn't like you, just accuse you of being crazy, and they come after you to take your guns away. Now, if somebody is really a threat to someone, they're going to be a threat, as this Dayton shooter tweeted out. He said, hammer, brick, gun. You know, those are all things that can kill people. And as I pointed out yesterday, nobody talked about the individual who, for 2 hours, conducted knife attacks. He killed 4 people in 2 hours before he was stopped. He injured another 2 people with a knife. And, of course, we've had situations back in 2014. We had in China, we had a situation where 33 people were killed. 130 people were injured with knife attacks. 2 years later in Japan, similar situation. You had a couple of dozen people killed with knife attacks and so forth. Because it's the individual that is dangerous, not the weapon, but they are red flagging the weapon. This is gun control, folks. This is gun control and repeal of the Second Amendment with a kind of Soviet-style oppression. There's an article on Zero Hedge by John Wilder. He said, red flag gun laws or how to repeal the Second Amendment Soviet-style without having to have some kind of a pesky vote. When you look at the Electoral College, for example, think about the fact that, you know, the Electoral College is something that is built into the Constitution. It is an inconvenient fact for these people. So they've got a dozen different ways to get around it. They can go with a national popular vote compact where they say, well, we're all going to get together and agree that when we get enough states into this compact and their vote totals come up to more than 270 electoral votes, which is the majority, then we will all agree, all of our states will agree that no matter who our voters choose at the state level, we will go to whoever we are told has the most number of popular votes. So they get rid of the Electoral College and go to a direct democracy on a national level, throwing away, if necessary, the preferences of the people in their state. Because if you've got a situation where the biggest and the most corrupt jurisdictions, like Chicago, New York City, or LA, if they pad the vote with millions of votes, even letting illegals vote, and you say that candidate A wins the popular vote, then they say, well, then we're going to give all the Electoral College votes to that as well. And if that doesn't work well enough, they can manipulate the census to make sure that they change the distribution of the Electoral College representation by counting foreign citizens. So these people, when they have something that they don't like the Electoral College or like the Second Amendment, they just have other ways, multiple ways that they can get around it. And that's what we're talking about here. Let's make no mistake about this. We've never had these issues when guns were more widely available and more openly carried. Again, every time we come up to this gun control issue, you all know, if you are of a certain age, people my age and older know, that you used to be able to take your guns to school and practice as part of the ROTC. You saw people all the time. And this isn't just when I was a child. When I was an adult, still saw people driving around in the parts of America that I lived in with rifles in the back of their pickup trucks. They have a rifle rack. You could see it right there in the glass. Why didn't we have these kind of shootings then? What has changed in our society? Why do we have to get rid of the Second Amendment? Why do we have to penalize law-abiding citizens for the actions of people that the government never decided to do anything about? This individual in Dayton had 7 years ago, when he was still in high school, he had drawn up a list of people that he wanted to kill and rape. He was known to law enforcement. They did nothing about it. Do you think that the government is going to do something about this? No, this is just a way to enact gun control. Let's play video clip number 5. This is President Trump, what he has to say about red flag gun laws.
These barbaric slaughters are an assault upon our communities, an attack upon our nation, and a crime against all of humanity. We are outraged and sickened by this monstrous evil, the cruelty, the hatred, the malice, the bloodshed, and the terror. The shooter in El Paso posted a manifesto online consumed by racist hate. In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. Hatred warps the mind, ravages the heart, and devours the soul.
Now, as you heard President Trump, if I just read that to you and I asked you who said that, we could play the same game with President Trump that we have played with all of these Democrat candidates. I have played for you in the past statements by Barack Obama, by Hillary Clinton, by Joe Biden, by all these senators on the left who want full open borders now. And in the past, they have all talked about the fact that we need to have law and order, we need to have a border, we need to have immigration enforcement, we need to have border patrol and so forth. They have all said that. And you go back and you play what they said 5-10 years ago. And you say, can you believe that that's coming from these people? I could read that speech to you from President Trump, and if I didn't tell you who that was, you would believe that that was Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Barack Obama. Those are the talking points of the left. Why is he doing this? This is a no-win for President Trump politically. He is going to get no credit for this from the left. He's not going to win anybody over in the left. He's going to alienate his base. Why is he doing this? Is it because he has turned? Is it because these people in the establishment believe that we are coming up to a very difficult time in our society? They've got to make sure that they keep order. Just as I read for you the pronouncements of the protagonist in Fahrenheit 451, we got to keep the people calm. And let's make sure that we not only burn their books and control their information, but let's take their guns as well. When we come back, I want to play a clip for you of the people in Hong Kong who are facing the real reason that we have the Second Amendment. And they're saying, we wish we had the Second Amendment. And let me tell you something. We're going to be wishing that we had it pretty soon as well. Welcome back. I've only got one more segment here in the program. And I played for you Lindsey Graham saying he's never seen President Trump as determined as he is now to do red flag laws and to do background checks. And they're going to put out a grant program at the federal level to subsidize a massive new psychiatric bureaucracy that is going to ferret out anybody who doesn't think the way they think they should, right? And I just want to ask you, as we look at this, and every time we have a shooting, people look at this and say, well, how did this person get the guns? Did they get the guns legally? Did they get the guns illegally? How could this have been stopped with gun legislation and so forth? Take a look at the Dayton shooter, for example, a guy who was known 7 years earlier. He's an avowed Satanist, putting threats out on social media and so forth. He was flagged multiple times, twice, for drawing up lists of people that he wanted to kill, people he wanted to rape. But that wasn't a red flag to these people. I want to do for you right now, let's do a background check on the psychiatric industry, the psychiatry industry. Let's take a look how psychiatry has been used for political oppression. As I said earlier, there's a great article on Zero Hedge by John Wilder saying red flag laws are the way that we can repeal the Second Amendment without having that pesky vote. And he says, the history of psychiatry is tied directly to the political. He said, psychiatry is still the most politically abused medical profession. And now the federal government is going to subsidize that weapon to be used against the American public. Should you be concerned? I mean, isn't this something that only the people in the Soviet Union do? Because that's what everybody thinks about, right? The Soviet Union, they didn't like you. They just accused you of being insane and hauled you off to the gulag, send you to Siberia or whatever. Because, if you criticize the government in the Soviet Union, they used to say when I was growing up, you're obviously crazy. If you criticize Stalin, you're obviously crazy. We don't even have to have a determination or any due process. You're crazy. And quite frankly, folks, these people already think that if you own a gun, you are already de facto crazy. So we don't even have to do the due process, right? You're guilty. You're guilty. You look at the Soviet Union and what they did. Going back to 1978, reports say that at least 4.5 million Soviet citizens were listed as having mental health problems. In 1988, just before the fall of the Soviet Union, that would be when Bernie Sanders was over there partying for his honeymoon. They said, thinking that they might face their own version of Nuremberg trials, Soviet leaders had over 800,000 patients removed from the list of the mentally ill. Oh, just like that, they realized that they had an error. And so as he writes in the article, was that a false diagnosis? Oh, you can bet. You can bet. Thousands, hundreds of thousands? No, actually millions of people falsely diagnosed in the Soviet Union. But it's just the Soviet Union, right? No. Cuba did it. China is still doing it. As a matter of fact, when you look at China doing this, that's one of the bases for which they persecute the Falun Gong. They accuse them of being crazy. They lock them up. And as he points out in this article, the World Psychiatric Association must be taking a lead in the investigations to debunk this and to criticize the Chinese for abusing their profession, right? No, they're absolutely silent about that. They pretty much ignored it. And then they doubled down and agreed with the Chinese government, saying, the people of Falun Gong, they're obviously nuts. And, of course, the Chinese are saying that about the Christians as well. Take a look at the 1920s here in America. We had Sacco and Vanzetti, other people who were communists or dissidents put into asylums. In the 1960s, and, of course, this has come up recently as people keep saying, what about that 25th Amendment? Can't we declare President Trump crazy? Because we had the American Psychological Association smear Barry Goldwater in 1960, saying, we've done a diagnosis by distance, and we believe that he's got some psychological issues. Absolutely wrong. And they put out a statement after that, which we talked about when people started doing their own non-diagnosis of President Trump. We said, remember, you guys called foul on yourself after you did that to Barry Goldwater. Now you're trying to do it again. Then we had in 2012 the case of Adrian Schoolcraft, the case that I've talked about many times. This is a a real straight-up police officer who is very upset about the policing for profit that he saw happening in New York City. The stop and frisk, how they would harass people, how they would arrest them and fine them for minor violations. You know, smoking in your own barbershop. Or if you decide that, all right, I'm not going to violate the law, I'll stand outside my barbershop and have a cigarette, then they get you for loitering. They were told at one point, just round up anybody that you see, bring them in. It's a Halloween night. I'm sure they're guilty of something. Just bring them in, drop them off, go out and get somebody else. We'll come up with the charges later. Adrian Schoolcraft said, I'm not doing that. His father was a cop. He believed that his job was to walk the beat, and they busted him. They said, okay, you're going to go out and walk the beat. He said, good, that's what I want to do. I want to know the community. I want to be there to protect them against crime. I don't want to be there to harass them. And so what they did was, and he started recording what these people were telling him. He wore a mic. They found out that he wore a mic. And they went to his apartment, and the senior New York Police Department officer said, we're very concerned about your mental health. They took him off and put him in an asylum in New York City, the whistleblower. And the only way we know about that is because his father, again, a retired police officer, went to his apartment and found that Adrian had another recorder that he had on the bookshelf that they didn't find. He got the recording, and he started searching for the insane asylums where he found his son. This is 2012. This was New York. Remember Dinesh D'Souza? Remember he gave too much money to a political candidate? Remember how outrageous it was that he was sent to jail for giving too much money to a political candidate instead of just getting a fine? But that wasn't all, was it? No, Dinesh D'Souza was not only sent to prison, he had to have, the judge gave him years of mandatory mental health counseling, despite a licensed psychologist saying that Dinesh D'Souza was just fine mentally. What we have seen is psychiatry used as a political weapon. And now we've got Lindsey Graham, of all people. Come out of the closet, Lindsey, before you start talking about psychiatry. Lindsey Graham talking about how President Trump is going to give federal funding and grants to bribe local officials to weaponize psychiatry against American gun owners, law-abiding citizens. If you don't see this as a red flag, you're not paying attention. If you're going to give President Trump a pass on this because he's a Republican, because he's President Trump, he is wrong on this issue, and you better wake up before you let the Second Amendment and the rest of the Constitution and our individual rights be stabbed in the back. As the saying goes, you got to get behind somebody before you stab them in the back. And maybe that's why we got President Trump in place right now. I'm very upset about what President Trump has not done and what he is about to do. And folks, this is not only a red flag, this is a red line. And you better stand up and stop this. I don't want to see this being weaponized. I don't want to see this kind of corruption being funded by the federal government. They have bribed people to take away our due process with the war on drugs and seizure of assets. Look at civil asset forfeiture. Where's all this coming from? Oh, well, you know, this, we violate due process. We take people's property without giving them any due process. We don't wait until they're found guilty. As a matter of fact, we don't even charge them. We just take their cars. And of course, you know, if you want to contest this, it's going to cost you $1,000 to do that. And they do the same thing with CPS. You got the federal government bribing a massive bureaucracy of psychiatrists in many cases, taking people's children without even telling them why. Only 15% of the cases involve even accusations of violence or sexual assault, and most of those are disproven if they get their day in court. And now we're going to do the same thing to gun owners? Yeah, the people in Hong Kong say, we wish we had a Second Amendment. I wish we had a Second Amendment. I wish we had a government that didn't lie to our face when they took the oath of office. People like President Trump, who obviously doesn't care or never read the Constitution. Folks, I'm out of time here. We got got less than a minute. And I just want to tell you, if you want to stand for the First Amendment, opinions are not a crime. Owning a gun is not a crime, but it is, both of those are being made a crime right now. And we have at InfoWars, we have the Banniversary sale. They don't want you being told this information. They don't want you to see this information. If you want to support us, we've got a massive discount right now, 50 to 60% off the products at InfoWars Life, InfoWarsStore.com, all the InfoWars Life products, things like storable food, up to 50% off, free shipping, double Patriot points. If you don't support us, you are our only sponsors. We are up against a massive system of oppression that is it's a public-private partnership between DARPA, between the biggest companies the world has ever seen.